It began with one woman. Within a week, it was 30. Within a month, by the most cited estimates, the number had swelled to 400. The arithmetic alone is staggering. 30 people dancing in the streets of a city of 20,000 is a spectacle. 400 is a civic emergency. But the raw numbers fail to convey what the dancing actually looked like. What it sounded like, what it smelled like, what it did to the people trapped inside it, and to the people forced to watch. Picture the horse market of Strasbourg in late July. The square is broad and open, one of the few spaces in the city where sunlight reaches the ground without being sliced into ribbons by overhanging eaves. On a normal day, it would be filled with merchants, livestock, and the steady commerce of a trading city. But this is not a normal day. The merchants have been pushed to the edges. The livestock have been cleared. In their place, a wooden stage has been erected, hastily built by the city's carpenters on the orders of the Privy Council. And on this stage, and around it, and spilling into the surrounding streets, dozens of people are dancing. They are not dancing the way you imagine dancing. There is no grace here, no pattern, no partnership. Their movements are spasmodic and violent. Arms flail in wide, uncontrolled arcs. Legs stamp and kick and buckle. Bodies spin in tight circles, lurch sideways, collide with one another, and somehow keep moving. Their clothing is soaked through with sweat. Their faces are masks of exhaustion, hollow-eyed, slack-jawed, skin glistening and flushed. And their feet are the worst part. Swollen to nearly twice their normal size, bruised purple and black, the skin cracked and weeping fluid. Blood has seeped into their shoes, leather boots and wooden clogs alike. And with every stamp and shuffle, the wet sound of it is audible to anyone standing close enough. Some have lost their shoes entirely. Their bare soles raw and split, leave dark smears on the wooden planks of the stage. Others have wrapped rags around their feet in a futile attempt to cushion the impact, but the rags are soaked through and slipping loose with every step. The smell is overpowering. Sweat, urine, blood, and the sour tang of bodies pushed far past the point of endurance. Flies circle in dense, lazy clouds. The July heat magnifies everything. Even the onlookers standing at the edge of the square press cloth to their noses, unable to bear the stench rising from the stage. And through it all, music plays. The city council, acting on the advice of the guild physicians, has hired musicians to accompany the dancers. Drummers, pipers, fiddlers. Professional performers paid from the public treasury to keep the rhythm going. The logic came from humoral medicine. The dancing was caused by overheated blood, so the dancers must dance until the fever broke. To help them along, the council ordered not only music, but also the presence of strong, healthy volunteers, whose job was to prop up the dancers when they stumbled, to keep them upright when their legs gave way, to ensure that the dance continued uninterrupted. These volunteers gripped the dancers by the arms, hoisted them back to standing when they crumpled, and pushed them forward into the rhythm again. A grotesque parody of care that must have looked, to anyone watching, like the machinery of torture. The council was not being cruel. They were being rational by the standards of their own medical framework. They had consulted the physicians. They had followed the prescription. They had allocated public funds. Every step of the process had the appearance of responsible governance. And they were catastrophically wrong. The music did not cure the dancers. It fed the plague. The drums and pipes echoing across the horse market signalled to every terrified citizen within earshot that the curse of St. Vitus was real, that it was powerful, and that it was here. The spectacle of dozens of writhing bodies on a public stage, accompanied by professional musicians and sanctioned by the city government, was not a treatment. It was a demonstration that confirmed the deepest fear of every person in Strasbourg, that the saints' wrath was upon them, and no one was safe. The crowd that gathered was enormous. They came from every quarter of the city: guild members, beggars, merchants, priests, nuns, porters, washerwomen. They lined the edges of the square 3 and 4 rows deep. Some climbed onto barrels and carts to see over the heads in front of them. Others watched from upper-story windows, their faces framed by half-timbered casements, unable to look away. And as they watched, the same thought moved through the crowd like a current through water. If Vitus could seize those people, he could seize anyone. None of them were free of sin. The boundary between the dancers and the watchers was not a wall. It was a membrane, and it was dissolving. And so they joined, not all at once, but gradually, over the course of days, the crowd began to thin on one side and swell on the other. A woman near the edge of the square felt her foot begin to tap. She tried to stop it. She could not. A man watching from the bridge felt a tremor in his calves that climbed to his knees and refused to be still. One by one, then in clusters, the watchers became dancers. The transition was not dramatic. There was no moment of collective decision, no signal, no command. It was quieter than that, and more terrifying. People simply crossed an invisible line and could not cross back. The Imlin family chronicle records that within a month, the number had reached 400. At the height of the epidemic, the death toll reportedly reached 15 per day. The dancers died of stroke. They died of heart attack. They died of sheer exhaustion. Their bodies simply shutting down after days without food, water, or rest. The exact number of fatalities is unknown. The city's own records do not specify a death count, and later chronicles disagree on the figures. What is not disputed is that people died. They died on the stage. They died in the streets. They died in the wagons that eventually carried them away. They died with their legs still twitching. The Privy Council recognized the failure relatively quickly. The stages were torn down, the musicians were dismissed. A sweeping ban was imposed on all public dancing and music throughout the city. Sebastian Brandt, the Strasbourg Chancellor, drafted the exception personally. If honourable persons wished to dance at weddings in their own homes, they could do so with stringed instruments only. Tambourines and drums were forbidden. Percussion was deemed more likely to trigger the mania. Strings with their softer and more contained sound were judged less dangerous, a distinction that reveals how desperately the authorities were grasping for any logic that might give them control over a situation that had none. But banning music was a reactive measure, not a cure. The dancers were still dancing, their bodies were broken. Their minds appeared to have vacated. Witnesses described their eyes as vacant and expressionless. They cried out for help even as their legs continued to move. They begged to stop even as their arms kept swinging. The disconnect between their words and their bodies was perhaps the most disturbing element of the entire episode. These were not willing participants. They were prisoners of their own limbs. The council's next decision revealed the true nature of the crisis. Having failed with medicine, they turned to religion. The most severely afflicted were loaded into wagons, still twitching, still jerking, their ruined feet dangling over the edges of the carts, and transported on a 3-day journey to the mountaintop shrine of St. Vitus in Hohenstein, near Saverne. The roads out of Strasbourg that August must have been a sight no traveller would forget. A procession of open carts, each carrying bodies that would not stop moving, rolling slowly through the summer countryside toward a chapel on a hill. The scene at the shrine was extraordinary. Priests received the dancers beneath a wooden carving of St. Vitus. The choreomaniacs were given red shoes sprinkled with holy water. On the tops and soles, priests painted crosses using consecrated oil. Small wooden crosses were placed in the dancers' hands. The air thickened with incense. Latin incantations filled the chapel. The ritual was elaborate, solemn, and performed with the absolute conviction that only divine authority could undo what divine authority had unleashed. And it worked. One by one, the dancers began to still. The convulsions slowed. The flailing arms came to rest. The vacant eyes blinked, focused, and filled with tears. Word reached Strasbourg that the ritual had succeeded. More dancers were sent. More were cured. By late August or early September, the stream of suffering pilgrims had diminished to a trickle. The dancing plague had lasted somewhere between 5 and 7 weeks. It had consumed 400 people and possibly killed dozens or more. It had overwhelmed the city's medical establishment, defied the Privy Council, emptied the public treasury, and left an entire population shaken to its core. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The streets were quiet again. The horse market returned to commerce. The guild halls were swept clean. The musicians packed up and went home. But the silence that followed was not the silence of resolution. It was the silence of a city that had survived something it could not name, could not explain, and could not be certain would not return. The dancing stopped. The bodies stilled. The red shoes were removed. But the most important part of the story was only just beginning, because the central question was not what happened. The question was why. The first serious attempt at explanation came from Paracelsus, the physician and alchemist who visited Strasbourg in 1526. His conclusion was breathtaking in its confidence and devastating in its prejudice. The dancing, he declared, had been a hoax. Frau Trophea had begun dancing deliberately to humiliate her husband. Having seen the success of the trick, other women followed suit, powered by what Paracelsus called free, lewd, and impertinent thoughts. He classified this form of mania as chorea lasciva. Dancing driven by voluptuous desires, performed without fear or respect. Paracelsus deserves some credit. He was among the first to locate the cause in the minds of the dancers rather than in the heavens. But the idea that hundreds of people would dance themselves to death merely to annoy their spouses is, to put it gently, insufficient. He saw the bodies, but not the suffering. He heard the music, but not the scream beneath it. For centuries, the dancing plague remained a footnote, a curiosity trotted out to illustrate the supposed irrationality of the medieval mind. It was not until modern scholars returned with the tools of psychology and social history that the question received serious treatment. The first modern theory to gain traction was ergotism, poisoning by ergot, a fungus that grows on damp rye. Ergot contains ergotamine, a compound structurally related to LSD. Ingestion can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and a burning sensation in the limbs. The condition was known in the Middle Ages as St. Anthony's Fire, and it had devastated communities across Europe for centuries. The theory is initially persuasive. Strasbourg's poor subsisted on rye bread, the harvests had been bad, and damp conditions favour ergot growth. But the theory collapses under scrutiny. John Waller, whose research on the plague is the most rigorous to date, identified several fatal flaws. Ergot restricts blood flow to the extremities so severely that fingers and toes can blacken and fall off. A person poisoned by ergot could not physically dance for days. Second, ergotamine affects individuals differently. It is extremely unlikely that hundreds would all react by dancing. Third, the geographic pattern is inexplicable under the ergot hypothesis. Every major dancing plague between 1374 and 1518 occurred along the Rhine and Moselle rivers. These cities had different soils, different weather, different crops. What they shared was not a grain supply. What they shared was a world view. Waller's own theory is both more complex and more disturbing. He argues the dancing plague was mass psychogenic illness, psychological distress manifesting as involuntary physical symptoms across a group. This is not metaphor. It is a well-documented medical phenomenon. When large numbers of people share the same beliefs, the same fears, and the same unendurable stress, their bodies can begin to express what their minds cannot contain. The expression takes the form that the culture makes available. And in the Upper Rhine of 1518, the available form was the dance of St. Vitus. His argument proceeds in 3 steps. First, the preconditions. The people of Strasbourg were enduring suffering extreme even by early modern standards. Failed harvests, waves of disease, crushing taxation, and the violent suppression of peasant revolts had eliminated any hope of relief. The psychological pressure was immense, constant, and inescapable. Second, the cultural template. The people of the Upper Rhine suffered within a framework that told them their suffering was divine punishment, and that among the instruments of that punishment was the curse of St. Vitus. This was mainstream theology, preached from pulpits, confirmed by the memory of previous dancing plagues in the same region. The belief functioned not as superstition, but as fact. If you lived along the Rhine, you did not wonder whether Vitus could curse you. You knew he could. The only question was whether you had sinned enough to deserve it. Third, the trigger. When Frau Trophea began dancing, she provided the spark. Those who witnessed her dance recognized it immediately as St. Vitus's curse. The sight triggered the fear in others, and that fear, in bodies already weakened by years of deprivation, crossed the threshold from thought into action. Once the movement began, the same belief system made it impossible to stop. The dance was not a decision, it was a curse. Only the saint could end it. The minds of the choreomaniacs, Waller writes, were drawn inwards, tossed about on the violent seas of their deepest fears. They entered dissociative trance states in which the connection between intention and action was severed. Their conscious minds may have been screaming for the movement to stop, but their bodies were operating on a deeper program, one written by terror and faith and the accumulated weight of years of suffering. The dance was not a choice. It was an eruption, the body expressing what the mind could no longer hold. This interpretation gains strength from comparison. In 1963, in newly independent Tanganyika, an epidemic of uncontrollable laughter broke out at a mission school and spread to hundreds across multiple villages. Schools were shut down, families were disrupted. The laughter was not joyful. It was distressing, exhausting, and unstoppable. It occurred in a community under extreme stress, the anxieties of post-colonial transition, economic uncertainty, and rapid social upheaval. Like the dancing plague, it took the form the local culture made available. Similar trance phenomena have been documented in Brazil, Madagascar, and Kenya. Involuntary states triggered by extreme pressure, in which bodies move without conscious direction, and the perception of pain and exhaustion is pushed to the margins of awareness. What the dancing plague reveals is not medieval irrationality. It reveals the fragility of the human mind under sustained, inescapable suffering, and the power of belief to shape the form that fragility takes. The people of Strasbourg did not dance because they were foolish. They danced because they were broken. The dance was the body's scream when the voice had been silenced, the stomach emptied, and the soul crushed beneath a weight it was never designed to bear. And the most unsettling implication is this: the mechanism has not disappeared. It lives in the architecture of every human mind, waiting for the right combination of stress, belief, and a single spark. September came and the streets of Strasbourg were still. The stages had been dismantled. The musicians had been sent away. The Privy Council resumed its ordinary business. The horse market sold horses again. The grain market sold grain. For a brief, fragile moment, it might have seemed as though the whole episode could be folded away and forgotten. It was not forgotten. In the immediate aftermath, the city's relationship with its medical establishment shifted. The guild physicians had prescribed the dancing cure. They had recommended music and stages and encouragement. The council had trusted them, funded their prescription, and watched it make everything worse. This did not destroy faith in medicine overnight, but a crack had appeared. The dancing plague demonstrated that the authorities who claimed to understand the human body did not always understand it at all. The physicians had been confident. They had been wrong, and people had died because of that confidence. It was a failure that would not be named as such for centuries, but it lingered in the city's memory like smoke after a fire. Invisible, pervasive, impossible to fully clear. The church too emerged altered. The pilgrimage to the shrine had been presented as proof of divine mercy. The saint had cursed the sinners, and the saint had forgiven them. But beneath that narrative lay a more uncomfortable truth. The belief in St. Vitus' curse had not prevented the plague. It had caused it. The faith people clung to for protection had been the mechanism of their suffering. The very prayers they whispered for safety had fed the terror that made them vulnerable. In the years following 1518, the intensity of St. Vitus' veneration along the Rhine began to wane. Not suddenly, but with the slow erosion of a belief tested to destruction. One of the most striking features of the aftermath is the silence in official records. The Privy Council minutes document the outbreak in administrative terms, expenditures, orders, decrees, but do not name the dead, do not record fatalities, do not reflect on what happened. The official record treats the plague as a problem managed and resolved, not a trauma experienced and mourned. This silence suggests not indifference but shock. The council had no framework for processing what had occurred, no word for mass psychogenic illness, no concept of collective trauma, no precedent for a crisis in which the enemy was not an army or a disease, but the city's own terror turned against itself. So, the record closed the file and the city moved on. But history does not require official permission to remember. The chroniclers preserved what the council suppressed. The Imlin family chronicle recorded the numbers. Daniel Specklin described the stages. Johann Schilter quoted a lost manuscript poem that captured the mania in verse. Many hundreds in Strasbourg began to dance and hop, women and men, in the public market, in alleys and streets, day and night, and many of them ate nothing until at last the sickness left them. These were acts of cultural memory, attempts by successive generations to make sense of something that stubbornly refused to make sense. The visual record proved equally persistent. In 1564, Peter Bruegel the Elder produced a drawing depicting victims of a dancing epidemic in Molenbeek. Bodies rigid and contorted, faces blank, supported by companions whose expressions hovered between pity and horror. In 1642, Hendrik Hondius created a print based on Bruegel's drawing, spreading the image further into European consciousness. The dancing plague passed from local memory into collective iconography, a symbol of the body's vulnerability to forces beyond reason. The event's cultural half-life has proven remarkably long. In 2020, Jonathan Glazer released Strasbourg 1518, a short film in which contemporary dancers performed alone in empty public spaces during the COVID-19 lockdown. Their movements a haunting echo of the original choreomaniacs, their isolation a mirror of a world once again gripped by crisis. In 2022, Florence Welch named her album Dance Fever and wrote Choreomania as a direct response to the 1518 events. The parallels she drew were explicit: the loss of bodily autonomy, the surrender to forces larger than the self, the thin line between ecstasy and destruction. These are not coincidences. The dancing plague endures because it touches something unchanged in 500 years. The details are different. We do not fear St. Vitus, we do not build stages for the afflicted, but the mechanism is the same. Human beings under sustained, inescapable stress will find a way to express that stress through their bodies. In Strasbourg, it was dance. In other times, it has been laughter, fainting, seizures, or the sudden spread of symptoms through a school or a community. Outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness continue to be documented worldwide. In 2011, in Leroy, New York, a group of high school students developed involuntary tics that spread through the student body. No toxin was found, no infection identified. The cause was conversion disorder, the mind converting distress into physical symptoms. The students were not pretending. Their suffering was real. Their bodies were doing things their conscious minds did not want and could not stop. The parallel to 1518 is not approximate. It is precise. And there is the broader resonance. We live in an age of viral contagion, not only biological, but informational. Social media has created a global nervous system in which fear and panic spread across continents in hours. The mechanisms differ from Strasbourg. Algorithms replace alleyways, screens replace stages. But the dynamic is eerily familiar. A single individual acts, others witness. Witnessing triggers imitation. Imitation amplifies the signal. What begins as one person's response becomes a collective phenomenon beyond anyone's control. The Privy Council hired musicians believing they were helping. Modern platforms amplify content believing they are connecting. In both cases, the intervention accelerates the contagion it was meant to contain. This is the legacy of the dancing plague, not a quaint medieval anecdote, but a mirror, one that reflects the permanent vulnerability of the human mind, the power of shared belief to shape physical reality, and the ease with which a society's attempt to manage a crisis can become the crisis itself. The people of Strasbourg were not fundamentally different from us. They were people living under extreme pressure in a system that offered no voice, no relief, and no explanation except one that made the suffering worse. They believed what their culture told them. They feared what their faith told them to fear. And when the pressure became too great, their bodies did what their words could not. They screamed the only language their world recognized. They screamed by dancing. 500 years later, the cobblestones of Strasbourg's old quarter are smooth and clean. The Horse Market is a pleasant square where tourists photograph half-timbered facades. The cathedral spire still dominates the skyline. The Ill River still winds through the city, but it no longer carries the waste of 20,000 desperate souls. The tanneries are gone. The shrine of St. Vitus at Saverne stands quietly, visited by hikers rather than by wagon loads of convulsing pilgrims in red shoes. But the dance has not truly ended. It has simply changed its form. Every time a community is pushed to the breaking point, every time shared fear overwhelms individual reason, every time the body speaks what the mind cannot bear to say, the echo of that July afternoon returns, faint, familiar, and impossible to ignore. Frau Trophäa stepped into the street on a summer day and began to move. She had no music. She had no audience. She had no explanation for why her feet refused to stop. She danced because something inside her had broken, and breaking was the only language left. The music stopped 500 years ago. The dance in one form or another continues.